what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, March 19th, 2018. Getting into the bottom half of the month here. We got a lot of stuff going on here today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A lot of stuff going on here. Another bad day on the Dow. People are getting very, very nervous about that. The Russian elections are now over. Vladimir Putin has won re-election by a sizable margin. And apparently somebody somewhere wanted to interfere with that because the Russian Central Election Commission came under massive cyber attack, a distributed denial of service attack from 15 different countries. And there are allegations of ballot box stuffing. We don't know if that was for or against Putin. But it appears that, like Donald Trump, he won by such a landslide that the efforts to change the election did not work on out. So congrats, Vlad. We're glad to see you still holding on to your office. And I'm sure the reason he won is the people of Russia understand. Vladimir Putin is a statesman more than a politician. He's trying to keep the wars from growing. He's been constantly pushing to try and find agreements and settlements for people to avoid war. Standing in sharp contrast, of course, to the United States of America, which is just starting wars left and right everywhere they can. Now, down in Austin, Texas, there's been a fourth bombing, and this happened last night, and the bomb apparently was different this time. Mostly they've been these packages with a weight on a lever, and when you move the package, the weight falls off the lever pops up, the bomb goes off. This one was a tripwire, and basically was activated when two people were riding their bikes and hit the tripwire. So we don't know what's going on down there. We don't know what the motive is. There's been no note. There's been nothing going on whatsoever, except that all four of these attacks so far seem to be hitting well-heeled middle-class neighborhoods. So we'll see what's going on there. Now, Samantha Power has come out with an ominous message to Donald Trump. And as you know, Brennan came out with a comment after Attorney General Jeff Sessions fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, which is a move praised by the president. Investigators had found McCabe had made an unauthorized disclosure to the news media and lacked candor, including under oath. And yeah, I think pretty much everybody agreed he should be fired. But Brennan came on out and attacked Donald Trump on Twitter for his venality, his moral turpitude, and political corruption, and said Trump will take his rightful place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. Now, Samantha Power, who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations under President Obama, basically warned Trump, it's not a good idea to piss off John Brennan. And a lot of people are wondering, what is she talking about here? Is she talking about a potential assassination? All right, we're going to take a phone call. Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I have two things on my mind, and the first thing has to do with McCabe. I am glad he was fired, and I'm glad he's not getting his pension for the simple fact that he sold this country out and not only lied, as well as John Brennan. Talking about a demagogue, John Brennan is probably one of the ones that's behind of all of this, too, and I think he should be watching his mouth and not be saying the things that he's saying. I think his hand was caught in the cookie jar, as well as Samantha Powers, and I think they're going to get it. I think they're going to get what's handed to what's coming to them. I was wondering if you think about or agree with that as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's a very complicated situation, and sometimes it's hard to get a handle on what's going on inside the administration because there is all this chaos and this turnover of personnel. But right now, it feels like Donald Trump is finally starting to put on the presidential brass knuckles. Unfortunately, the new people who are coming on in appear to constitute a war cabinet and I'm not happy about that.
Totally agree. My second thing that I wanted to ask you was about Russia and Putin. Are they going to blame Putin for rigging his own election?
Probably. Anything they can say about bad about Russia, they're going to go ahead and say it. No question.
Yeah. I mean, and I agree with you. We should not be. We should be having détente with Russia. They're a natural ally, and we shouldn't be. You know, and I agree that the United States should not be going around and being, you know, the world's police. We have issues here, and I agree with you. And you may have said this before. We need to bring our troops home. We have issues here in the homeland, then we shouldn't be fighting all these foreign wars. We got issues here, like taking care of our republic.
I agree.
I mean, you know, let's bring our troops home. Let's, you know, our borders. Let's arm up our borders. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it or not about Matt Damon going to Australia, but I mean, Australia doesn't bring people in. They have their natural border, you know, known as the Barrier Reef in the Pacific Ocean. They have a man-made or a natural-made moat with sharks. I mean, and they deport people that don't want to be there. They deport, you know, to an island. So I don't understand the hypocrisy of why these people don't want to be here in the United States. Then leave. Go ahead and leave. We don't want you here anyway. You know, have a nice day. But, you know, as far as all this with McCabe, I think we're about to see these people, they're going to start rolling over because they're caught. They're just straight up caught.
I would certainly hope so. But, you know, a lot of people inside Washington, D.C. know what's going on, and they also know the price they'll pay if they go public. They'll wind up like Seth Rich.
Yep. I mean, and as Brennan, the cryptic statements that he's saying, and I forget the guy who said, you know, you crossed the intelligence agency, there's 7 ways from Sunday to get you. I mean, they've come out and said they're going to, with Bill Mudd said it, you know, we're going to kill the president. I mean, these people, the evidence is in plain sight that they want to do the man harm. These people have no business being in our government.
No, they don't. And we were never supposed to be a country that was run by the intelligence agencies. That's just not the way it was set up. And Harry Truman recognized this. He said when they set up the Central Intelligence Agency, there was a risk because throughout history, the secret police have always worked to basically subvert the government to their own ends.
In 1947, when the CIA was created due to executive order, did Trump sign an executive order and rescind the CIA? Is it too late for that?
Well, technically, yes. He could sign a new executive order and say the CIA is hereby dissolved. That certainly would get him killed. And then whoever his successor was would come on in and say, oh, no, the CIA can keep on going. I mean, President John F. Kennedy actually signed an executive order to basically transfer responsibility for covert paramilitary operations from the CIA back to the Pentagon. And it was simply never implemented because of bureaucratic resistance. And that's probably one of the reasons why the CIA was part of the plot to kill Kennedy.
I agree. Well, you have a great rest of the show, sir, and I hope you have a great, wonderful day, and give Miss Claire the best.
I certainly will. Thank you very much for the kind words, and I will give your regards to the lovely lady Claire. She's in the office next door here. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to the White House, a lot of people are very concerned that John Bolton is coming back in to the White House as National Security Advisor. He's a hardcore pro-Israel war hawk, was part of the group of people who were orbiting around the Project for the New American Century, which was arguing for global war, global conquest by the U.S., which we seem to be in the middle of right now, not doing all that well. So a lot of people are very worried. Bolton apparently has been seen at the White House on several occasions briefing Trump and other high-level officials. So Trump is getting some bad advice. He's getting advice that favors Israel and is not necessarily the best advice for America and the American people. Now, Hillary Clinton is backing away from a comment she made while she was touring India about how she lost the White House because women voted the same way as their husbands, that their husbands told them how to vote and the women just caved in. And it's produced a tremendous backlash. So Hillary Clinton has come on out with a lengthy explanation for the comments and said she never meant to cause offense by claiming white women voted Republican because of their husbands. But she's got something like 42 reasons why she lost the election. And they're all except the main one. We didn't like her. We do not like Hillary Clinton. We don't like the stench of corruption that surrounds her and Bill. And that's why she lost the election. All right, we're going to take another phone call from Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, 42 excuses, I think that requires a Rolodex, doesn't it?
Probably. You have to be my age to remember what a Rolodex is.
Yeah, well, hey, no, your caller talking about McCabe being fired and not going to be able to receive his pension. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that he's had a couple offers on the table from other Democratic legislators who said they will hire him temporarily to give him the necessary time he needs in office to get his pension. So that whole thing, firing him before the deadline there, it doesn't look like it's going to pan out. If there's a way of giving him the time needed, it sounds like they've worked this angle, at least the lawmakers have made an angle that they can do this, hire him temporarily to give him the time needed. So that probably won't work, unfortunately.
Well, I was already hearing that his pension was in jeopardy following his firing, which sounded to me like they were going to find some way to make sure he got his pension anyway. And I'm not sure about the mechanics of government work. I mean, he's been in the FBI all this time. If he gets a job as a clerk in some other part of the government, whether that would qualify as time served for his pension or not, I really don't know. But yeah, I agree. They're going to find some way to give him his pension.
You know, it should be, but probably government, it doesn't apply. But I know in regular industry it applies. There's a do not hire. If you're fired, you can't get rehired in the same organization, the same company for a different job once you've been fired. But obviously in government, that may not apply. Last comment is the person who mentioned about Matt Damon moving to Australia. I'd say go for it. I don't think Matt Damon's done his homework quite well because they don't have a Second Amendment clause there, amendment to protect him with a weapon. They don't have weapons in Australia, so stalkers could be out there, and he doesn't have a way to protect himself. So you may want to rethink that one.
Well, I've been to Australia twice on film projects, and I really loved the place. In fact, one of the companies I worked for offered to make the job permanent and get me and Claire citizenship, and I came very, very close to taking them up on it. But I figured I needed to get back here and finish the work that I'm doing now. I'd never even thought about gun rights down there in Australia. I know in the outback, people do have guns. You have to have guns to protect yourself. So I'm sure there's some provision there where you're allowed to have weapons in certain circumstances.
I'll check on it, but as I heard, they've kind of stripped Australia. Maybe in the outback there, you can have it protect yourself. But other than that, they don't have the rights we have here to protect ourselves, the gun rights. So I'll look into that, but that's what I understand.
Yeah, I know there was a mass shooting incident down there that a lot of people think was another false flag, and basically pushed through a gun grabber agenda there. But yeah, again, in the outback, if you're away from the urban areas, I think you're still allowed to have guns, because there's a lot of nasty critters out there that you need to deal with.
Yeah, that's it, Mike. Hey, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch to Laura in Michigan. Aloha, Laura. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was watching RT today, and this weekend they were celebrating the 4th anniversary of the reunification of Crimea with Russia. You know how the main street always says that Russia overtook Crimea? They were celebrating.
Yep.
Big celebration.
Well, again,
I watched Putin stuff.
Russia didn't take or annex Crimea. Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine, and then they voted to merge with the Russian republics. And it was like the voter turnout was something like 90% in favor of both of those. And the U.S. position is they do not recognize the right of the Crimean people to vote for secession, even though they're guaranteed that right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it's kind of like a guest at a wedding refusing to recognize the bride's right to marry the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's the rationale behind the U.S. position. But no, the Crimean people wanted to be back with Russia. They hadn't been happy when Crimea was given to Ukraine in the first place. And in fact, apparently it violated Russian law for Crimea to be given to Ukraine. So they're all seeing it as a correction of a long overdue wrong. Again, they're very happy with this.
Putin won by 70%.
I heard
and here's
75.
the thing: how they ran their. Okay, heard how they ran their elections to make sure that they were good elections. They invited 1,000 non-Russians to come in and watch the polls. They also, there's a good idea for us. They ran webcams in the polling places. I think that'd be a good idea for us, like in some of the inner cities where there's a lot of immigrants voting, to run a webcam.
I absolutely agree. And, we need to get back voter ID laws. This ID situation is just utterly ridiculous right now. When I was talking to a friend of mine who has to renew his driver's license this June, and he's got to provide a social security card and a birth certificate and a bunch of other stuff. And he says, it's a 3-hour process now to get your driver's license renewed here in Hawaii. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you can just walk on into California and they'll give you a driver's license.
I thought that maybe if people knew there was a webcam, that more people who are illegally voting might not try it.
Well, I'm sure the Democrats would argue against it, that voting has to be private. They're fighting against any attempt to impose a voter ID law to verify that somebody's actually a citizen and eligible to vote. They've openly said they're dependent on illegal immigrant voting to hang on to power.
Right. And who else would vote for those lunatics? It's a lunacy party, you know?
It really is.
That's how I feel about it. Yeah. No. I thought Vladimir Putin, another little thing tidbit that I picked up, the real communist that was running against Putin, last time around, he had gotten 15% of the vote. This time he's only 12%. So the hardcore communists are not in power. They're losing power in Russia.
Well, that's a good sign. That's definitely a good sign.
People don't know. 86% of Russia is Orthodox Christian.
Yep.
And that never comes out.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think I got it all.
Okay. Well, then thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
It was almost 76%, Mike. It was a landslide.
Yes, it was.
76%. And that gives him empowerment, Mike. He's got the way now to do what he needs to do. He doesn't have anybody blocking him since he's got that percentage. And, Mike, you know they're blocking the polls in Ukraine? Because, my family's from Ukraine. They blocked the polls. Svoboda, the right sector, blocked the people from voting in Ukraine. Can you believe that? That so-called democracy we set up with the puppet Poroshenko, right?
Yep.
See? And Crimea, 93% of the people, Mike, voted for Putin. 93%, Mike.
Yep.
And John McCain comes out and says they cheated because they saw that webcam. You know, all the people, like the previous caller said, Mike, all the people could watch those webcams in Russia online, through the TV, and they got caught cheating, and that polling section got canceled, whatever the votes were there. So, but John McCain, says he cheated. All the tabloids come out. Can you hold me over, Mike?
Yeah, I'm going to hold you over. Stay on the line. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get on back to Dustin in New Jersey, I want to remind you that if you are able to help Republic Broadcasting, we really need it. This is no joke. We're in a war against the deep state and the corporate media, and we need your help. to stay on the air. And if you can donate, the address to send a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you'd like to call in and become a recurring subscriber, the phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. By the way, apparently Representative Chaffetz on Fox News this morning said that McCabe is going to get his pension after all. All that he's losing is his earnings between now and his official date of retirement. Now, going on back to Dustin in New Jersey, let's just pick up where you left off.
You know, like I said, Putin has, he's got now the people backing him for what he does. Everybody knows what he did in Syria. Everybody knows he kicked the terrorists out of there. Everybody knows what he's standing up for. Mike, there's so many closet Putin fans around the world. That's what scares this deep state around the world. The globalists, because you go on YouTube, even like the message boards, everybody's saying like they know what's going on. Even in Britain, they know this is a scam. This whole nerve gas agent thing.
Yes.
They don't believe the official story. So it's not working. Hey, Mike, this is crazy. And Goebbels in Nazi Germany took out this ad in one of the German newspapers showing like a giant spider over the earth, and it's like it said communism on it. It was like an orange spider. This newspaper in Britain used the same photo with Putin's face on the spider, showing him over the earth. They're using Nazi propaganda, Mike. How sad is that?
Oh,
that shows you what these people are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
It's funny, but it's not, Mike.
Well, I'm one of the people who has a great deal of respect for Putin. That goes back to when he negotiated Syria's surrender of their chemical weapons. And then, of course, the U.S. goes ahead and invades anyway. And they're getting ready to invade again because they don't need to be seen to lose one of these wars. Or the American people are going to say, let's pull the plug on all of this.
But don't you find it funny how the United States didn't get rid of any of its chemical weapons? It was, according to the treaty, Russia was under with the UN. They saw them get rid of their chemical weapons, and so was Syria. And the U.S. still is holding on to a stockpile, and I want to know why.
Well,
I want to know why.
The U.S. has a long history of ignoring treaty obligations, and yes, following the Chemical Weapons Convention, all of the nations who signed on there destroyed their stockpiles of these chemical weapons, except the United States. The U.S. still has a stockpile of those, which they, can put into use at some point.
And then we all have to thank Theresa May and Boris the Clown Johnson and the UK for getting that extra 8% out for Putin in the voting the voting booth, because they really pushed Russia. They pushed Russian nationalism because of that. So these people are stupid. They're stupid.
Yeah, they are.
Have a good show, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I just got an email from somebody down under regarding their gun laws saying, yes, you are correct about the false flag. They set up and blamed a moron. They used the same playbook as America. Yes, we do have guns and plenty of them. We have to be licensed, and each individual firearm must be registered. I think Matt Damon will be given a special carry permit because he has money. So that's the word on that. All right. Let's clear our little text window and get on back to the show. Here's an interesting story, and it's not going to be a surprise to people who've been paying attention all along, but this came out of Russia Today, and they're quoting former FBI Assistant Director James Kallstrom, because apparently Sunday he said there was a conspiracy in Washington to protect Hillary Clinton from indictment. And Kallstrom also said the ongoing chaos in Trump's cabinet may be a symptom of the plot. And basically, he was being interviewed by the Washington Examiner, actually Fox News host, Maria Bartiromo. Yeah. Do you think somebody was directing them, or do you think they just came to the conclusion on their own, this leadership at the FBI and the Department of Justice, that they wanted to change the outcome of the election? And Kallstrom basically came on and said, I think we have ample facts revealed to us during this last year and a half that high-ranking people throughout government, not just the FBI, high-ranking people had a plot to not allow Hillary Clinton to be indicted. I'm almost ready to forgive him for what he did on TWA 800. Almost. But he's right. And it basically underscores my theory that Hillary Clinton, while Secretary of State, was committing espionage. That if the full truth about the Clintons were to come out, it would delegitimize the entire government. We'll be back after these few words with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We have callers waiting on the line, so let's start with Nick in the United Kingdom. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the aftermath of that guy, Sergei Skripal, who was poisoned near Salisbury in England. And, I mean, I've been listening to you for the last few months, analyzing the anti-Russian propaganda that's coming out of Washington and so on. And I'm just here to tell you that it's alive and well in the UK. I've just spent a weekend. I devoured the Sunday. I had one of these weekends where I just devoured the Sunday press, like cover to cover. And I've got to say, there is just a total lack of any kind of critical thinking going on in the coverage of this. And the level of intolerance is almost quite frightening. I mean, if there's any criticism of the Prime Minister's so-called tough stance, or of the state, or of the security services, this is just, it's mocked, it's made fun of. And, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, and the treatment of him recently has been absolutely disgraceful. I mean, I've got no particular truck for him. He's an old-style socialist, so he's not quite my cup of tea, but you know, he really deserves to be heard when it comes to matters of foreign policy, and he was absolutely steadfastly, resolutely against bombing in Syria and all the military interventions. I mean, last week he refused to rush ahead of the evidence and criticize the Kremlin, and just said, let's wait for the evidence. And he's just been absolutely hung, drawn, and quartered in the press and in the body politic as being an appeaser, a Kremlin puppet, just because he doesn't support this sort of automatic, knee-jerk, tough standing up to Putin. I mean, his spin doctor, some guy called Seamus Milne, after Jeremy Corbyn wrote an article about this, saying let's not rush to judgment, and so on. I mean, his spin doctor described said, let's have a look at the facts. He described the intelligence reports around Iraq as having been, quote, problematic, close quotes. I mean, that's diplomatic language, if ever I heard it. He could have used far worse language. And horror of horrors, he almost suggested somebody might be framing Russia. But these Labour MPs, they just absolutely, they were disgusted at Corbyn, they were disgusted at his spin doctor's comments, they were branded a disgrace, they don't speak for British values. I mean, what on earth is that?
Yes.
All he did, and the bottom line is, if you get to the point, following the protocol of the Chemical Weapons Conventions and the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, I mean, the Russians are entitled, they've got a 10-day period, they're entitled to get a sample of this stuff for analysis. I mean, and they just, the British government seems to be saying, well, we don't need to send an analysis to them. We know it's the Russians and trust us because we say so. I mean, maybe this Novichok agent, maybe it was made in Russia. Maybe it was, ordered by the Kremlin. I mean, I don't know. How on earth would I know? But I'm certainly not going to accept that because the British government says, well, we know, we've got these secret documents, this secret evidence, so trust us. I mean, hello? All these politicians, so one of these Labour Party, and after Corbyn had done this, his allies on TV being interviewed and questioned, well, do you believe the secret services? Oh, yes, we do. I'm thinking, well, what? I mean, am I going crazy or something? But I mean, why is it that nobody has any sense of critical thinking? Why won't any politician go up there on the media and say, well, hang on, we were told about weapons of mass destruction. We were told Saddam could attack us within 45 minutes. We were told Gaddafi had these goon squads that were killing civilians. We were told there were, nice cuddly moderates ready to take over in Libya, etc. And after Corbyn made these comments, everybody rushes to, and then the sands that they shift, and everybody then has to take the party line. There's just a sort of collective dumbing down of the body politic, and everybody in the public and the media is supposed to just accept this nonsense, or this lack of critical thinking. I don't understand what's going on. I really don't. I mean, it just horrifies me.
I can imagine it does. What's going on, of course, is classic war propaganda. And there's nothing new about that. When they were ramping up the propaganda for World War I and World War II, the attitude was even back then. If you dare question the views of the government and the media, you must be part of the enemy. And now they're calling Corbyn a Russian stooge. They're already calling the independent media that we're, arms of Russian propaganda. And that's all it really is. It's propaganda. The difference is this time that the people of Great Britain and the United States and everywhere else, we're remembering all the times we've been lied to in the past, and we're not believing the propaganda. And that's why they're in a bit of a panic in the government and the corporate media. Because if they want a war, they have to convince us that it's moral, that it's right, it's just, and that we can win it. But as you say yourself, nobody's believing this anymore.
I mean, I really wonder about the quality of some of these politicians, what happens to them. They get into positions of power and they get drunk on it or something. We've got this guy called Gavin Williamson, he's 41 years old. He's the defense secretary. He got the job because the previous defense secretary was a bit of an oaf around women and got caught up in all that stuff. And nobody'd heard of him until he got the job, because he was one of Theresa May's allies. And last week, he gave some speech, and he literally told Russia to shut up and go away. I mean, it's the sort of language that my 9-year-old son uses.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? My 9-year-old isn't Her Majesty's Secretary of State for Defense. These people are absolutely absurd. I mean, Boris Johnson is out there, Russia, all these cyber attacks and their involvement in Syria and annexing Crimea and calling Putin a bully. I mean, I thought when the Soviet Union fell apart that Reagan and James Baker promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch towards the old Soviet Union, not 1 inch.
Yes.
I mean, for goodness sake.
They went ahead and did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look at what happened in Ukraine and so on and everything. I just see that. I remember the frenzy that we went through here in the run-up when we were getting ready, all gung-ho, going into Iraq. And I see the same frenzy now. Theresa May, they go on about, it's a breach of international law. I mean, to me, that's such a red rag to a bull, because it seems, breaches of international law are a bit like cherry picking. It's like going to a sweet shop and, the ones you want and you don't want. I mean, breaching international law didn't get in the way of killing over 1 million people in Iraq.
True.
The one breach of international law, my personal thing, the China going into Tibet in the 1950s, it's a massive breach of international law, but, nobody gives a damn because we mustn't upset China. Whenever anybody claims breach of international law, to me, it's always problematic, because it's such a, because you can just choose whatever you want from it. I didn't see anything in the British press over the weekend analyzing what possible motive could Putin have for doing this. I mean, why on earth would he do this for a spy that's been forgiven officially and gone into one of these spy exchange programs? Why, when he's being provoked from everybody left, right, and centre, would he do the one thing that is going to give everybody in the West an excuse to hammer at him? I mean, he's not a fool.
No.
Nobody in the press analysed that. Nobody in the press here talked about this Novichok agent. There's been a book on Amazon for 12 years telling you how to make it. Nobody talked about the aggression by the West. And I remember going back to the Brexit, campaign, the non-debate that David Cameron had with Nigel Farage when Cameron did his piece about why we must stay in the European Union. He ended it with, we must have it for security against the Russian threat and Russian aggression.
Yes.
Even as far back as that was used as one reason why we've got to stay in the EU. And it goes back a while now. But the frenzy and the jingoism and it's scary. The lack of, and I really do wonder, have we as a population been so dumbed down that we have no real ability to think analytically and critically and have any kind of doubts in our mind and remember the lies we've been told? Because honestly, my experience of reading the Sunday press this weekend, it was so depressing. I can't tell you how profoundly depressing it was.
Well, I think the fact that you're on the phone right now to our show and expressing these thoughts and feelings is a signal that probably most people of Britain are doubting the official story, and maybe they're staying quiet out of a sense of politeness or a misplaced sense of patriotism. But again, I think the reason they're pushing as hard as they can on the propaganda is it's not getting traction. We've been lied to so many times, we're just not willing to listen to the government. We're certainly not willing to take their word or trust them on any of this stuff. Nor should we, because we've been lied to so many times.
Oh well, that was all I had for you tonight. But I do think we need more people in this country doing what you're doing and telling the people, because I really do worry that we're just all this. The propaganda, it's relentless. It's relentless, and it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to anybody with half a brain who's willing to think critically. And I fear that we don't, we have a population that isn't willing to think critically anymore.
I think more people are thinking critically than not. And I know that there's a segment of the population that doesn't want to face up to where we are as our nation's heading toward an obvious world war. And they're trying to basically stay with their denial. During World War II, it was called the good Nazi syndrome. People in Germany who knew in their heart of hearts the country was headed in a bad direction, but they wanted to show that they were patriots, and they stayed silent, and they lost their country. But more and more, as I travel around here on Oahu, talking to people, the vast majority of the people I talk to, they know something has gone horribly wrong with the country. They may not have all the fine details that we have in the independent media, but they're not complacent, and they're not happy about what's going on.
Great. Well, I hope, and long may that continue. Long may that spread widely, because we need that message. We need that critical thinking and that ability to not take the line. It's desperately important now, because what I see going on here is frightening. It's really frightening.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Anyway, thank you very much for the phone call.
Thanks very much.
We're going to let you go and switch over to David in California. David, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, how are you? I know you. Anyway, I called in last week, and I had mentioned that I had heard that Tillerson had been fired on a tweet. Remember that?
Yes.
And then you said, I just got an email, and they said that he wasn't. So there you go. Well, I heard on Fox yesterday, several hosts mentioned that he got fired on a tweet. And I'm just wondering, do you think Fox just doesn't vet there, or get emails that said, no, they didn't? I mean, who was the person that said that it wasn't true, and was he vetted? I mean, do you trust him? Do you even know who the person was?
Tillerson was officially fired by the White House last Friday, or actually a week ago Friday. And the corporate media came out with the story that the cruel and heartless Trump had just fired him with a tweet. And that's not exactly accurate. The tweet announced his firing, but he'd already been fired through the proper channels prior to that.
But you would think if Fox was on Trump's side to a degree, why would they say that?
I'm not sure that Fox is still on Trump's side. They were during the campaign.
Yeah.
At this point, there's been major changes at Fox News management, and I think they're starting to toe the propaganda line. Like Nick was saying in Great Britain, we're not seeing Fox question or analyze the story about the poisoning of that Russian double agent. More and more Fox News is being dragged into line with the rest of the propaganda.
Yeah, that may be true, too. I was just curious. The reason I called, though, is I had heard yesterday on Red State mention of a stabbing up in Pittsburgh at a high school.
Yes.
Where 22 kids were stabbed. Did you hear that or see that in the media? I mean, you know, I follow the news as much as anybody does. I did not see that.
No, and I think the reason...
I mean, more people
were... my first question is, was the person who did the stabbing an illegal immigrant or a refugee?
Yeah, that I don't know. But why? Yeah, I mean, but really, they wouldn't. Isn't that newsworthy if 22 people get stabbed at a high school right after Parkland?
Well, the problem is that the gun grabbers are after the guns, and
well, I know that. I mean, that is
not
my
coming
point.
for the knives.
You know, it's like, but it isn't even newsworthy.
Apparently not, and I'm willing to speculate, and I don't know, but I'm willing to speculate that crimes involving the immigrants and the refugees are being kept out of the media, because we're seeing that all over Europe.
Yeah.
Where crimes that are committed by the immigrants and well, in their case, the refugees, are kept out of the media in order to move along the globalist agenda. So
yeah, I believe that, but and I do too. I believe that, but man, you can't hold that kind of a story back out of the news. I mean, that's crazy. I would just encourage people to go look and find out who this person was that did it. You know, and if they have any idea whether he was a refugee or not, because that's a great point. And but if it's happening here and a story that big can slide by us, think of what else can slide by us.
Yes.
Anyway, I appreciate your time.
All right, I'm looking at the story right now, and they've named him as Alex Kribal, and but they're not saying where he was from. But he's reported to have been wearing a blank expression on his face. So my question would be, is he on prescription antidepressants? And that would certainly be another reason why they would not want that story inside the corporate media, because they're trying to basically hide that link between prescription antidepressants and these crimes to protect the pharmaceutical industry.
You know, you always say, when you check out a story, see what they're not saying, and that's kind of what prompted this, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, we're going to let you go, David. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, I was just, when you were talking earlier about whether or not there is
Peter, we got to take a break.
Command behind.
Peter, I'm sorry, we just ran into the commercial break. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Peter in Los Angeles, and Peter, just please start.
Well, you were talking earlier about is there a guiding hand from above in this thing against Trump? And I just was putting this down. I'm going to start with the FBI here really quickly. A name named Strozek, who's the head of counterintelligence for the FBI. Mm-hmm. His girlfriend, who's the Justice Department or a lawyer with the FBI. Comey, Mueller, McCabe. Then a Justice Department, Rosenstein. Then we've got the FISA judges themselves that it turns out they're also in on it, at least to an extent. At the UN and the State Department, we have Power and doing her unmasking. At the CIA, we have Brennan and Clapper, both involved.
Yes.
The media involved probably with Operation Mockingbird. Then we have the Democratic Party. Remember how they paid off McCabe with Terry McAuliffe?
Yes.
And all that. Then we have the Obama Justice Department under Lynch and Holder that was shaking companies down in order to shake them down for contributions to places like Antifa.
Yes.
And Black Lives Matter, which has been their like sort of street thug, brown shirt foot soldiers in the riots against Trump. So now we have multiple agencies within even within the FBI. the director of national intelligence, Clapper, John Brennan, the American Himmler. We have all these people, Samantha Power, unmasking, Terry McAuliffe from the Democratic Party. Of course, we've got Hillary. All that stuff, it's absolutely, to me, it's a complete no-brainer. This is Obama, and this is Hillary. Completely a complete no-brainer. And whether they're being used by the intelligence community or the intelligence community is using them, it's almost a moot point. But that's what they're doing. And somebody is guiding this, and who alone supervises the State Department and has authority over Terry McAuliffe, who, by the way, used to be head of the Democratic National Committee,
Yes.
or the UN or the FBI. It all comes to Obama. And, Obama wanted Hillary to win, of course, because that means his crimes are covered up.
Yes.
His unmaskings, his so that's my point. Who could it be other than Obama?
It could be Hillary. I mean, she's been the mastermind behind Bill Clinton for the last 30 years. And certainly Obama is working with her. But I would say it's more likely that Hillary's calling the shots. If Hillary wasn't out there screaming about how she lost, okay, hang on a second. If Hillary would just shut up and go away, I think a lot of people would relax. So Obama definitely is a power player, being the former president. But I would take a good look at Hillary as being the mastermind behind all of this. And again, the reason is that she can basically blackmail the entire government. Anyway, listen, Peter, got to let you go. Got to do station identification, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're going to go back to the phones here. Kathleen in Paris, thank you for waiting so patiently all this time. What is on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Michael. I just wanted to talk about false flags and hoaxes, and we have to separate our false flags from our hoaxes sometimes. And I'm just reading in Paul Craig Roberts, and we all respect him, and
Yep.
he uses language quite clearly. And he says that no laboratory has reported. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the poisoning in England of the spy.
Okay.
Okay. And he says that no laboratory has reported any finding that such a nerve agent was used on Skripal and his daughter. We don't even know if any attack occurred. The corrupt British government has provided no evidence of any attack and no evidence of any nerve agent.
Yes.
So is this a hoax?
Well, it may be that Skripal was poisoned with something else, and they specifically claimed it was Novichok because that could be traced to Russia. But he could have been poisoned with any one of several different agents that would track back to other sources.
Well, but I just read it verbatim from Paul Craig Roberts that they don't even have an evidence of any attack.
Well, Britain refuses to release it all. Russia asked for a sample. And again, to me, the big red flag is Theresa May went to visit the site of this so-called attack. And even though the press is saying it was heavily contaminated and how dangerous this Novichok was, she's walking around there just in her regular clothes. No biosafety suit or anything. And to me, that says, yeah, something else is going on.
So she wasn't worried. Okay.
Okay?
That's all I have.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And the phone lines are now open again. So getting on back to the news. Let's talk about Robert Mueller. It looks like Trump is basically putting Mueller in the crosshairs. This ridiculous investigation of his really has gone on way too long. They've spent way too much money. It has utterly failed in its original purpose of proving there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. What they should have been looking at was the Uranium One deal, but that's still off limits apparently in official Washington. But Mueller is rather notorious for an earlier investigation, and it has to do with the anthrax letters immediately after 9/11. Robert Mueller was basically in control of that FBI investigation, which ran for 10 years. And originally they were trying to claim it was Al-Qaeda, and then they said, oh, it has to be a lone wolf suspect, and they settled on Stephen Hatfield as the culprit. And they basically destroyed his life. And they came up with this ridiculous story that Mueller literally had a floating hot box in a lake near to his home that he used to put the anthrax in the envelopes without exposing himself. Well, weaponized anthrax is very anhydrous. It has to be very, very dry. Even in just a moist environment, it clumps together and becomes unusable. But they hounded Stephen Hatfield. They couldn't make that stick. Then they moved on to Bruce Ivins, saying that he was the one. He'd actually been a volunteer. He had volunteered to help the FBI investigate the case. And then they turned on him and basically wrecked his life as well. Meanwhile, there was another suspect, and that one emerged when DNA analysis of the anthrax proved it was actually from a U.S. biological warfare laboratory. And there was a scientist who had been working there. He'd been fired for racist attacks on an Egyptian co-worker. And the security system shows that he entered that laboratory where the anthrax was kept without permission. After he'd been fired, he hadn't turned in his security cards. And there was evidence that he tried to erase the record from the security system, but it didn't work. And the FBI just stayed away from him, just like they're staying away from the additional suspects at the Mandalay Bay, because that's what the FBI does. They're in charge of the cover-ups. Now, a story coming out of the Washington Examiner. The other day we were talking about how the billionaires and the government have their doomsday bunkers, and apparently it is a booming business. It's one of the few businesses in the United States that's working really well. And there is what are called the doomsday camps that are being set up. And it's a network of these extremely rural locations, doomsday camps, and they're signing up members who will basically live in these doomsday shelters with a year's supply of food. And until then, these camps are engaged in prepper training and literally vacations. You can go and stay in one of these like you would a hotel. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Story coming out of 12160. The U.S. has been accused of training Syria militants for a false flag chemical attack as the basis for renewed U.S. airstrikes against Damascus. This is coming from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, interestingly enough, over in strategicculture.org, Seymour Hersh, very well-respected journalist, is saying that Hillary Clinton approved sending Libya's sarin to the Syrian rebels. So that's apparently where they got the sarin that they used on civilians and then tried to frame Bashar al-Assad for it. Now, Erdogan, down in Turkey, is vowing to expand his offensive operation in Syria into the eastern regions. In other words, he's pushing past the Kurdish territories and has now become a mainstay of the war on Assad. Getting on back to the Skripal case, Russia's foreign ministry is out there saying that the reason Great Britain is trying to whip up this story about Russia having chemical weapons and using them on Skripal is to basically expand the propaganda to say that Russia is using chemical weapons in Syria and should immediately be forced to leave. And again, it's going to be another false flag. Now, one of our callers earlier was talking about violations of international law. The U.S. is in violation of international law simply by being in Syria. They do not have a congressional declaration of war. They do not have a resolution by the United Nations Security Council. They are in Syria illegally. Russia, on the other hand, was invited in by Syria's legitimate government. They have Syria's permission to be there. The United States does not. Now, Jeremy Corbyn's response to the Russian attack on British soil was well-reasoned. Let's see the evidence and see where it goes. And for that, he was denounced as a Russian stooge. And now the Labour Party's top ally, John McDonnell, has done a 180 and says, oh, no question, Vladimir Putin did this. Absolutely no question. We should believe the British government. They would not lie to us about anything that important. Yeah, they would. Remember the dodgy dossier? The Downing Street memo? Yeah. Governments lie their people into wars. If any world leader got up and actually told the truth, I want all of you to put on a uniform and take a gun, you're going to walk over that border and you're going to kill a bunch of people and bring back all that wealth for me, who would go along with that? Nobody. They have to craft some kind of an illusion where the people will say, well, we hate war and we hate killing, but there doesn't appear to be any choice whatsoever. I mean, Hitler did it with the Gleiwitz incident. We've been attacked by Poland. They'll attack again unless we give them what for. Bush did it. Saddam has nuclear weapons. He's going to use them if we don't stop him. And of course, Saddam did not have nuclear weapons. And even if he'd had them, there was no reason for him to attack the United States unless he was being attacked. And that really did make the lie that obvious. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, that would have been the time for Saddam, had he had chemical and nuclear weapons, to use them. And he didn't, because he didn't have them. Now, apparently, the Remainers, or the Ramoners, if you will, are using this Russian poisoning to try and stop Brexit. One of our callers mentioned that before. You know, we have to stay united with Europe to be safe from Russia aggression. And oh my goodness, I mean, Theresa May is out there saying Russia has used a chemical weapon on British soil. Show us the proof. Show us the chemical. We're being lied to again to get us into a war. Story in the offguardian.org, basically going on back and saying that the nerve agent Novichok, which was described in this very sensational book that was written by this former Soviet chemical weapons expert, may not work. It may not actually exist anywhere. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you to go out to Amazon and buy this book and try and recreate it, because the two binary agents by themselves are highly toxic. When you mix them together, they become even more toxic. But basically, a lot of people are coming forward and saying, it may sound good in the book. We don't know that it can actually be made. We had that person who called into the show on Friday talking about the instability of some of these compounds. So this Novichok nerve agent may be as much a fantasy as Saddam's nuclear weapons were. Now, apparently, Turkey has become a loose cannon on deck in the Middle East to the point where the U.S., where NATO, is actually deciding to move its airbase from Turkey into Jordan. And apparently, NATO is no longer sure of where Erdogan is headed with all of his wars. That NATO may be losing Turkey, and they want to get their Air Force assets out of there before Erdogan can seize them, confiscate them. Now, Senator Corker is out there predicting that Donald Trump is going to withdraw from the Iran deal in May. And Corker told reporters that barring any surprise moves by the Europeans, Trump will not extend the sanctions waiver beyond the May 12th deadline. This will effectively put the U.S. in violation of the treaty, with Trump very obviously intends to withdraw. And that, in turn, will open the door to war with Iran, which is what Israel is pushing the U.S. to do right now. Now, getting on over to Korea, a senior North Korean diplomat who handles North American affairs is heading to Finland for talks with the United States and South Korea. I guess they decided to meet halfway, and Finland's kind of a nice place to be in. But Cho Kang-il's trip comes ahead of the possible meeting between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, which local politicians are still pushing for that to happen here in Hawaii, which would be interesting. Jam up our traffic yet again here. Story coming out of Al Jazeera. Americans have a constitutional right to boycott Israel, and that's absolutely true. But AIPAC just concluded their annual policy conference, pushing Congress to pass bills that would penalize Americans for engaging in their First Amendment protected right to boycott goods manufactured by Israeli on stolen Palestinian lands. And it is protected by our Constitution. And any of our members of Congress that are willing to sacrifice or abridge our First Amendment rights to protest Israel in exchange for AIPAC money needs to be voted out of office, because they are betraying the founding principles of this nation, even considering any kind of laws that would limit discussion on the crimes of the government of Israel. And they're out there trying to say, oh, it's anti-Semitism, it's hatred of the Jews. No, it isn't. It's criticism of a small group of people who run the nation of Israel. We're not even criticizing the Israeli people. We're criticizing their government. And that's really what the First Amendment exists for, that we can criticize any government that is behaving badly. Now, getting into the economic news, Russia's gold rush continues. They've got reserves at all-time highs. According to the Central Bank of Russia, their gold reserves have now reached $455 billion. That's the most they've had since September of 2014. They understand that the U.S. dollar is very fragile. They had a bad day on the Dow. It ended up something like 300 down. And 335 down on the Dow. So everybody's buying up metals, and they should. That's the best way to preserve your wealth. Story out of Bloomberg showing that supermarkets are starting to go bankrupt. Regional chains are going out of business. European-born discounters are expanding, forcing competitors to keep their own prices low. And Kroger Company and Walmart, the two largest grocers in the U.S., are investing in technology and expanding delivery as they try and fend off the incursion by Amazon.com Incorporated. And it's a very bleak outlet for a sector that was supposed to be rebounding this year. We're seeing all these iconic stores being driven out of business. And they want to blame it's Amazon, it's online delivery. No, people don't have money. I don't know about where you are living, but here in Hawaii, we're starting to see some really serious food inflation. Prices are just going up like crazy. And, of course, we're losing our local Toys R Us. And I remember when we first moved to this part of the island, there were several toy stores locally. There was a Thinker Toy, there was a KB Toy, and there was, of course, Toys R Us. They're all gone. They're all gone. And Claire and I are going to go on over after the radio show to Toys R Us, and we're going to stock up on soft plushy toys, because there's a bunch of new little people who are soon to arrive in our neighborhood, and we want to be ready. Ron Paul is out there questioning reports of an economic boom and pointing out that homelessness continues to skyrocket. The two don't line up. If there's an economic boom, then homeless people should be getting off the streets and back into residences, back into rental properties, and going back to work. It's not happening. What the government and the corporate media are telling you about the economy and what you can see with your own eyes do not line up. So we're being lied to about that as well. Down in Venezuela, they've come to an agreement with India. They're going to stop using the US dollar and conduct their trade between the two nations using the rupee. And apparently Venezuela has similar arrangements with Turkey, China, and Russia to basically get away from the dollar and the US imposed sanctions. Because not all countries on earth are going along with the US sanctions. And all we're doing with all these sanctions is we're walling our economy off from the rest of the world. The sanctions have repeatedly brought more harm to the West than to the targeted nation. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both. Just to preface my commentary to you, I don't really know that much about the stock market, let alone participate in it, which I'm glad I don't to start with because I think it's a sham. That being said, according to you, recently it went down 300 points or however many points it was, and that's supposedly a bad day or whatever the case is, for whatever reason. Now, with that being said, is that to say that if it drops 1,000 or even better yet, 2,000 points, that would be a disaster? Or what?
It would be considered a crash, and I think when the big one does hit, it's going to be bad because the market is overvalued. Now, maybe the brokers on Wall Street are trying to figure out a way to get the stock prices back down where they're supported by the value of the underlying stock, and to try and do it in a way that doesn't spook the investors into a panic.
Interesting. So basically, when it drops down like maybe 2,000 points, then that means that the stock market is crashing.
If it does it in a very short period of time, if it's like over a period of weeks or months, it's called a decline.
Well, that would tend to make sense for that matter. So if it drops down to 500 points or whatever, is that a issue to be having a count over, or just simply making note of it?
If it drops 500 points, I think the trading curbs kick in to prevent a complete free fall. Anybody who's bought their stocks on margin would get a margin call, and it was the margin calls that really caused the majority of damage in the 1930s crash, because they wanted everybody into the stock market, and you could buy an issue of stock for 10% of its face price, and the other 90% was on the margin. And when the stock price went up, you could pay off the margin. But when the market crashed, of course, the brokerages came on out and said, you know, we need that margin money now. And that's what resulted in massive homelessness and unemployment. It really was a tremendous shock to the entire nation. And I think this one could be just as bad. I don't know how many people are buying stocks on margin, but I do know that a lot of retirees' 401ks are tied up with the stock market. And so they would be hit really, really hard in the event of a crash.
True. As much as I find this all fascinating as to how this is rigged, rolling, and whatever have you, terminology-wise, I'm wondering about one major thing. When you see pictures of video or whatever of people working in the stock market, and they're yelling, they're jotting numbers on a pad and yelling, and whatever the case is, I'm surprised they don't have laryngitis for that matter. Mm-hmm. But do they actually have a day off just to get away from all that and de-wind from it, or unwire them, unplug themselves from all that?
Yeah, they get
so
the
they
weekends
can actually
off.
have a life?
The stock market is a Monday through Friday thing. Of course, people who are trading online can work through the weekend if they prefer. And the yelling is actually a side effect because there's actually a very complex sign language that's used between the buyers and sellers of stocks and the representatives of the brokerage house. And I know this because many years ago I worked on a movie, the movie version of The Day the Bubble Burst. I've talked about it before. And our technical consultant, William Hupt, and those of us who were playing the people on the floor of the stock exchange, they literally held a class to teach us the various signs that the buyers would use to get their bids in over all the yelling and shouting.
Yeah. Did you say E.F. Hutton?
No, William Hupt, H-U-P-T.
Oh, William Hupt. Okay.
And he had started a car company called Huptmobile, which didn't do very well. But he was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange on the day that it crashed. And he actually still had that last piece of ticker tape showing the losses framed in a shadow box that he was showing around. A lot of interesting stories out of him.
Do you realize that maybe end up being a priceless heirloom that he got a hold of?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. He certainly treated it that way. It was a very nice frame, museum quality glass. He knew what he was holding on to at that point.
Chances are he probably had that sucker insured as well.
I have no idea. It didn't come up in conversation. And the only other thing I remember from working on that production was meeting the old prop master from Star Trek, which I'd known him from years before, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I know who you are. And he'd actually written a book about the original Star Trek, and I got a copy and he autographed it for me.
Wow. Not bad, not bad.
Not bad.
Well, thanks so much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Okay, we already talked to Francis, and let's get back to the news here. Talking about the economic news here, and over in Natural News, there's an article. It says, chaos is a certainty. The lack of preparedness among city people is truly horrifying. And that's a valid concern, because when things break down, people who are not prepared, they're going to turn on their neighbors. One of the reasons, if you're a prepper, one of the reasons to sort of hide that and not talk about it is because when things go bad, you become a target. And people that you thought you could trust will be pounding on your door because they know you've got food and water. So, anyway, it is valid. It is valid. Everybody needs to prep. Not just a few, everybody. Because obviously, Claire and I can't prep for our entire neighborhood. And only a few people, like this HPD officer, know that we're doing it. That we have storable food and water. Now, over in France, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe is saying that France is going to get tougher on social media hate speech, by which he means criticism of Israel. And basically, they're saying they're going to have their own rules, regardless of what the EU wants to do. Didn't elaborate on it. But again, it's against the founding principles that France was built on. Amazing. Over in Spain, there's still major riots. I saw a video earlier today, which I've linked to whatreallyhappened.com, where all these refugees are grabbing chairs and using them to attack the police. And it's just full on. We're not talking about somebody who just, kicks over a trash can and protests. We're talking about literally street war that's going on. And apparently this was all sparked by the death of a Senegalese street vendor. And chaos just ensued. All of Europe is basically a bomb waiting for somebody to light the fuse. And we're seeing more and more migrant violence all over the place. In fact, over in Germany, they're starting to give the nurses in hospitals self-defense courses, because apparently the migrants will get injured, they'll be brought to the hospital, and for whatever reason, they just attack the nurses. Now, Brigitte Bardot, if you're my age, you remember her, very sexy actress, well-known, well-loved. And she's basically speaking out about the state of her country, saying that Islamists are practically everywhere and that France should not resemble Algeria. Speaking for the French weekly Valeurs Actuelles, Bardot said that France is not what it once was. She said, I have been brought up in honor, patriotism, and love, respect for my country, and when I see what it's become, I feel desperate. And she said, it's unacceptable to see burqas become commonplace in France, and Islamists are practically everywhere. This is what George Soros and the globalists want, the New World Order, everybody blended together, and they're not really concerned with all the stress that it's causing. They're just caught up in this liberal fantasy of a one-world government, and we're going to open the borders, and everybody's going to blend together, and they're going to hug and hug and hug and hug. And that part didn't work out. Crime has gone up. Contagious diseases are being reintroduced to places where they'd been eradicated. Sweden's become the rape capital of the world. And the people of Europe have really had enough of this. Now, over in London, child sex crimes have soared by 30% in Sadiq Khan's London. And apparently there were 1,200 incidents of child sex crimes last year. And the figures were released last Friday when the Metropolitan Police co-hosted a conference to raise awareness of the problem with the children's charity Barnardo's, which has launched a pilot scheme to help child victims of rape and sexual exploitation. And unfortunately, the media is silent on this because they're trying to protect the immigration agenda. And we have this grooming scandal going on. Article in John Rappaport. Law enforcement in the UK for years has ignored and rejected young girls' claim of serial rape by gangs. And these gangs groom the girls with drugs and alcohol, physical coercion. Sometimes the girls are trafficked to other locations in the country where they get raped. And the major reason the police have been sweeping all this under the rug is political correctness, fear of being labeled racist. Now, the controversial activist Tommy Robinson was trying to call attention to this problem. Twitter just closed his account. He's suspended. And that tells you where liberalism is really failing, because they don't care that people are actually being hurt. They're just clinging to this fantasy world that they've created and they think they're living in. And it isn't real. These people are not dealing with the real world. Now, over in Albania, police have arrested 39 people in a crackdown on crime rings, illegally sending about 1,000 Albanians to Britain, the United States, and Canada. And apparently authorities identified 7 criminal structures that helped Albanians immigrate legally by falsifying travel and identity documents of European Union countries. And these Albanians had paid anywhere between $9,000 and $30,000 for the forged documents. Now, in addition to the 39 who've been arrested, 12 people are still at large, including 2 Bulgarians. Police have also confiscated computers, cell phones, vehicles, cash, different documents, and weapons in the case. This is what happens when you open the borders and you're not checking the documents. Now, Jamil Shaw Sr. from Los Angeles tragically lost his 17-year-old son to murder at the hand of an illegal alien a decade ago, exactly 10 years ago this month. And Shaw says, right now, you know, you're hearing everyone demanding to be safe in their schools and their communities when our children are murdered, and we demand to be safe. We're all called racists and we're all bigots. And basically he's saying the guy who killed his son was on his third gun charge. But the same government that is trying to take firearms away from the legal American citizens don't care if illegal aliens are carrying guns. And he basically came on out and said that if this had happened to Nancy Pelosi's son, she would be building a wall all the way up to the moon. And we see the same thing being repeated time and time again. This adherence to the open borders agenda. And we know the Democrats are counting on illegal immigrants to vote them into power in November. And why Trump is not doing something about voter ID laws, I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. When you have to show your license to buy alcohol or tobacco or drive a car, it's not called racism. But the Democrats, every time you say, we need to confirm that somebody is actually legally entitled to vote, they go, oh, you're being racist. You're just being a racist here. We have to strike this down. It's unconstitutional. And there are Democratic leaders who are openly saying they are dependent on those illegal votes. And we're just letting them steal the store, is what's going on. I was talking to a friend of mine about how hard it is to get a driver's license in this state. Social Security card, birth certificate, bunch of other documentation, and yet illegal immigrants going into California, they get a driver's license. It's just handed to them. Our government is treating the illegal immigrants and the refugees better than they treat us. Now, getting on over to Parkland, two of the survivors, supposedly, of this shooting, one of which was David Hogg, who's known to be a crisis actor, were once again on CNN, basically demanding that Trump prove he's not owned by the NRA. I'd rather Trump proved he's not owned by Israel, but that's just me. Apparently, the Chinese Communist Party is pushing a U.S. gun ban. And we have these people who are saying no civilian should have military-style weapons. And then they criticize those who say gun ownership deters oppressive government. That's the reason we have the Second Amendment. And then the gun grabbers will say, oh yeah, your hunting rifle is going to stand up against the government's tanks and bombs. Well, in the hands of enough Americans, yeah. One of the big misconceptions about assault rifles is how deadly they are. Military assault rifles are designed to wound rather than kill. Because if you are in a battle and you shoot somebody and they're wounded, it takes two more of the enemy to take care of them and evacuate the field. Battles are all about numbers game. If you shoot somebody and they're dead, they've only lost one instead of three. And that's why military weapons are designed to injure. Yes, they can kill, but the intention of the small ammunition is to wound and tie up the other guy's resources dealing with the injured. Hunting rifles are designed to kill. Much larger, heavier ammunition. They're designed to basically knock down a large target instantaneously. So yeah, in point of fact, hunting rifles would be a formidable arm in the hands of the American people. Now, interestingly enough, Representative Tom Suozzi, who's a Democrat from Long Island, basically said Americans should grab their weapons and oppose President Trump by force if the commander-in-chief doesn't follow the Constitution. That's pretty strong words there from a representative. and it's putting a lot of public pressure on the president. He's basically talking about war and insurrection, and I think that's probably against the law. So things are getting very, very testy around there. Let's talk about that bridge that collapsed in Florida. Horrible tragedy. Now, this bridge was supposed to last more than 100 years and be able to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. And instead, it came crashing down within days of it being put in place. It wasn't even finished. They didn't even have the cable stays there. And apparently, it's now come out that following its placement across the road, somebody saw a large crack in the structure. And everybody got together and said, oh, it's not going to compromise its stability. Maybe not. The bridge was funded by a federal grant program, which has been repeatedly criticized for shoddy, politicized review process. And here's where it gets really interesting. In the name of diversity, they sought out an all-woman engineering team for this Miami pedestrian bridge. And again, when you're building a bridge, anything like that, you get the best people that you can, either male or female. But in this case, they said, no, we want an all-woman team. It's going to be a breakthrough for feminism. And critics are already saying the female engineers had major design flaws. They weren't able to do the job. It reminds me of when the U.S. Navy fast-tracked a female F-14 pilot. And while she was doing her carrier quals, she had a ramp strike, killed her Rio, destroyed the aircraft. This is what happens when politics overrides everything else. You start getting goofs like this. We're more politicized and politically driven than the former Soviet Union. All right, let's take some phone calls, starting with Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, the point you made about the driver's license, that's crazy because commercial drivers have to bring a passport now. Every time they renew their license for a valid birth certificate. So I really almost kind of wish they would make, people in the States do that, and they would really get upset enough that maybe, the officials and like Trump himself, would do something about that. Did you mention the Real ID?
Yeah, that's where all these requirements are coming from, the Real ID, and it's these very stringent requirements that you have to go through to prove you're a legal American citizen in order to get a driver's license. And at the same time, because of the open borders policy, they're bringing in these refugees and illegal immigrants who can just, apparently in California, get a driver's license without going through all this rigmarole. Over in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel is handing out free ID cards to the illegals and the refugees so that they can vote, even though they're not entitled to.
Yeah. Well, they're just doing that to get votes. That sounds like to me. So if they're doing that, that's so loose that it has to be the reason that they're just trying to get votes from people who shouldn't be voting.
Yeah, but then why put the legal American citizens through so much Sturm und Drang to get our driver's license? It's absolutely not fair. I think it's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Anyway, listen, Mike.
Thank you.
Got any more to say?
No, it was pretty funny when you talked about the money junkies. Do that again sometime.
Okay, I definitely will. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Joe, are you there? I guess we lost Joe. All right. Now, getting on back to this idea that companies, projects, whatever, are hiring people based on quotas and the continuing war against whiteness in this country. Over at the Huffington Post, their deputy opinion editor, Chloe Engvall, is now announcing the company has succeeded in its goal to have less than 50% white authors. Now that's discrimination, plain and simple. Discrimination on the basis of gender. Somebody needs to file a lawsuit. There needs to be a pushback here. We need to go back to being a meritocracy where the best people for the job are the ones who get the job. There was actually a time when I was working at the Jet Propulsion Lab where I almost lost my job because they needed a minority hire. But they decided that Rivero was close enough where I could keep my position. Had nothing to do with my job performance. Had nothing to do with the qualifications of the person they wanted to hire. They just needed to prove that they were hiring minorities. All right, it looks like Joe is back here. And Joe in California, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I was talking about voter ID and was thinking that perhaps those places that wanted to implement voter ID might be able to get around it by asking people to prove their age.
I'm not sure I follow you because, I see what you mean. Yeah, you've got to be a minimum age to be allowed to vote.
Many bars, it doesn't matter if you look 70, they're going to ask for an ID.
Oh, yeah, they do that down at the local Safeway. And I always tell them... Yeah, I always tell them I'm 12 years old. I only look like this because I grew up next to a nuclear reactor.
Yeah. I don't know. What would you think? You think you could get by with insisting on proof of age to allow someone to vote?
Yeah, that's perfectly legitimate. And proof of age would be an ID card of some kind.
Yes.
But you know what the Democrats are going to do? They're going to scream it's age discrimination, blah, blah, blah. They are terrified of any kind of voter ID laws. During the run-up to the 2016 election, during the primary season, Democratic lawyers were going into these states and getting these voter ID laws struck down, supposedly on constitutional grounds. I fail to see how the Constitution says that there's something wrong with having an ID. People have had ID throughout the majority of the history of this country. When I was in high school and college, I had a driver's license, I had an international driver's license, and I had a draft card.
I hear the music. Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go. We're going to do a station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Apparently, a listener called in to remind us all of how the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Arizona. This is a few years back, basically forcing Arizona to continue to issue driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, specifically the Dreamers. And it's a horrible mess. And again, the Supreme Court buckled under to claims of racial profiling and discrimination and racism. No, it's all a matter about being illegally in this country. There is no constitutional right for a non-citizen to be here. And it's not racist to say so. There is a legal method to become a citizen to this country, and anybody who goes through the process, and I've known some people who worked in the computer animation industry who became legal U.S. citizens. And welcome, glad you're here, hope it's not a disappointment. But this liberal idea that the borders should be down and anybody who wants to can walk on in and vote Democratic is destroying our nation. We're seeing the open borders agenda destroying Europe. And Bridget Bardot is right. Europe as it is today is not the Europe that those of us who've been there remember because of all of this Islamization, this displacement. And these countries are not able to sustain this population, most of them, of the migrants, are not able to find a job. They lack skills necessary to be in the job market in Europe. And so they basically live off the social net, the safety net, and the hereditary citizens of the country are having to pick up the tab. And there's a lot of resentment building up. Now, apparently, over at Uber, they've had a problem in Arizona where one of their driverless cars, and it got into a deadly crash, and apparently there was a death, and Uber's CEO has now halted all autonomous car tests until they figure out what went wrong. And again, I know there's the big push for driverless cars or cars that drive themselves, and it's basically coming on slowly. I saw an ad for a car back when we were shopping for our cars. There was an ad for a car, and I forget which one it was. But once you were in a freeway lane, you could take your hands off, and the car would basically just track the lines and keep you in the middle of it. It's sort of a gradual step up from cruise control. But these automatic driving systems are not truly intelligent. They're based on very simple rules. They're looking for things on signs. If the sign has been tagged, which is a major problem, the driverless cars will not recognize it. And that's a big problem. Now, do you remember way back when there was the crash of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 in Ukraine? And everybody was, blaming everybody else. There was a rush to judgment that Russia had done it, much as we're seeing with the current spy poisoning situation. But there had been this one story of a Ukrainian pilot who had left the airbase, taken off, was gone for a while, came on back and was shaken, and he was quoted as saying, "I got the wrong plane, I got the wrong plane." Now, my theory is that Ukraine wanted to shoot down Vladimir Putin's aircraft. His presidential aircraft, it's nowhere near as grandiose as Air Force One. It's a converted commercial airliner, and its painting, its livery, is very similar to the livery of Malaysian Airlines, and at a distance could easily be mistaken. And I think that's what was going on. So this Air Force pilot, Vladislav Volishin, had been given all kinds of medals, supposedly for something he didn't do, according to Ukraine, has been found dead in his home. They're saying that it was a suicide. However, the police are investigating his death under the premeditated murder section of the Ukrainian Penal Code. And they found a Makarov at the place, and they were saying that he was basically had been depressed for a while. He'd been promoted to CEO of one of the region's airports. So financially, he was doing very well. He had all these military honors heaped on him. But I can imagine if you've accidentally shot down a plane full of harmless civilians, that would kind of haunt you. And that may have been exactly what happened here. Up in Sweden, there's a great deal of outrage among archaeologists. And apparently the Stockholm's Landsmuseum, they're ordering the deliberate systematic destruction of newly found artifacts from the Iron Age and the Viking period. And according to the Landsmuseum, they're saying that these finds will be too burdensome to process. And so they're basically being put into recycling bins. Now, I don't know what's going on here, if Sweden is trying to erase the history of their forebears, but I could imagine there are museums around the world that would welcome these artifacts for their own collections. I imagine there are private collectors who would pay handsomely to possess some of this stuff. And that would mean more funding for the museum. But instead, they're literally taking these Viking artifacts and they're dumping them in the recycling bin. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network, and we're going to take a phone call from Curtis in Arizona. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'd like to make a comment about Fox News. I think that it's clear that they are controlled opposition, the conservative side, that the left is CNN, obviously. Anything the deep state wants, they're for Fox. They pretend to be conservative on domestic affairs, but when it comes to the foreign policy, especially lately, they're in lockstep with CNN. They're pushing for war because that's what their orders are. You had a caller who had previously made it sound like they were on the conservative side, but they're shifting away from Trump. So yes. I just want to make that comment. But the problem is that this works because most people, they're anything beyond 2 weeks of the news cycle, they don't retain. They just hear what they hear, they remember it for the last 2 weeks, and they react to it, and that's it. Is they don't have a big picture to look at, they don't have a long-term agenda to consider, and so they don't connect the dots. That's why something that could have happened 6 months ago that is very important to what might happen tomorrow, they won't remember. So it's easy to control the masses, even the conservative masses.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that point about. Mike, Hillary, as far as her controlling that whole Clinton dynasty, I mean, honestly, her father was a big shot in the Chicago mob.
Yep.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yep.
Okay, so that just start right there. And then that Bill Clinton was actually picked out of nowhere and put into a Rhodes Scholarship by somebody somebody high in the globalist agenda. This was early on, so I don't know if they got together before this or that put them together to make a match made in heaven or alternate heaven.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think when Hillary was first starting her career, there was still a great deal of sexism, and she needed a front. And, hang on just a second.
Right.
Curtis, I'm going to have to let you go. It absolutely slipped my mind that we have a third-hour guest, and that's Jim Beardsley. And Jim, I apologize. I lost my notes on that. Jim, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. So what is it you want to share with us today?
Well, I'd like to start out by reading a short message that's at the top of the USS Liberty Veterans Association website. And it says, the USS Liberty Veterans Association condemns in the strongest terms the use of our blood, the blood of our fallen shipmates, and the suffering of our families by individuals and groups who are working to achieve a goal that is hostile to the state of Israel or the Jewish community. We welcome the active participation of any person or group that does not promote such a despicable agenda and unilaterally reject those that do. I wanted to comment on that it was the Israelis that attacked the United States ship, the USS Liberty, in 1967. There were 34 dead sailors and 172 wounded. And what we're doing here is we're pandering. We're not supposed to say anything bad about the state of Israel. And this type of thing is going on all the time, the censoring with it and everything. Now, I'd like to add one comment here. We send $10 million a day to Israel. Recently, they had a fundraiser in Los Angeles for the Friends of the Israeli Defense Force. They've raised just short of $54 million. So let that sink in. We are paying the people that murdered and killed members of our armed forces, and we're giving them money. that's the perspective on this. What it belongs up at the top of the Liberty website, I'll never know. I think it's a shame that somebody put it up there, and it's really quite upsetting. It's so upsetting that I just learned today that one of my friends, Philip Turney, who was 3-time president of the association, has resigned, and that truly makes me sad. So I hope that defines where we're starting with the discussion today, Mike.
Well, you're right. We're seeing Israel trying to take control. Well, they've taken control of much of the media, much of the government, and they're pushing for unconstitutional, anti-First Amendment laws to protect themselves. And again, we're not criticizing the Jewish people. We're not criticizing the people of Israel. We're criticizing the actions of a government. And in the case of the USS Liberty, it's not just the government of Israel for attacking the USS Liberty. It's our own government for working so hard to cover it up and protect Israel. And it really is a very shameful incident in our history. And like you, I'm kind of wondering, who is it in the USS Liberty Association who decided to put that statement up there? And are they compromised?
Well, I don't know who put it up there, but Ernest Gallo is the president of the Veterans Association, so I would assume that the buck has to stop there with the president.
Well, clearly somebody in the organization is compromised. They were either being blackmailed or just outright bribed to put that up there. But again, it would have been more appropriate to say, we're talking here about the government of Israel, not the Israeli people, not the Jewish people. We're talking about the actions of the Israeli and U.S. government relative to the USS Liberty.
Well, to add insult to injury, the money that the Friends of the Israeli Defense Force gets is tax deductible. So we're paying for that. And prior to this fundraiser, they had $190 million Treasury already. Now, I believe you touched on it in your last hour about how France was coming up with new laws to do something about not speaking out or criticizing Israel. Is that correct?
Well, they're basically adopting their own laws for social media to stop what they call is hate speech. But further on down in the article, they make it very clear that they consider any criticism of Israel to be hate speech. No, it's not hate speech, it's criticism. And criticism is constitutionally protected free speech in this country. I don't know what the French equivalent would be, but again, to see all these governments around the world just bowing and scraping to the government of Israel on these issues of free speech, I find it very shameful that U.S. politicians, U.S. members of Congress, would even consider passing a law that sacrifices our First Amendment on the altar of Israel.
You got that right. And the last time that Netanyahu spoke to the United States Congress, he got 24 standing ovations, and 25% of his 40-minute speech was either applause or standing ovations. How can we have a Congress that stands up and applauds the leader of the country that murdered 34 American sailors and wounded 172 others? And by the way, the ship had to be scrapped. They never paid for it.
Well, as I recall, Israel never even compensated the survivors for their medical costs. But the reason Congress was standing up and down like a bunch of trained sea lions is that AIPAC had camcorders up in the gallery. And they had simply gone out and said, if you do not join with the applause for Netanyahu, we're not going to give you any more money for your next campaign. So AIPAC has bought and paid for our Congress out from, the control of the American people.
Yes, sir. They bought and paid for it with our money, by the way. We're giving them $10 million a day.
Yep. It's a kickback scheme. Congress votes more money to Israel. Israel sends that money back. It gets laundered and given back to the politicians.
I'd like to clarify another point once and for all. some people dispute the facts of the attack. There is nothing to be disputed. Admiral Thomas Moore, he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs shortly after that, and General Raymond Davis from the Marine Corps, and Rear Admiral Merlin Starling, and Ambassador James Atkins did a investigation, and the results were unanimous that Israel deliberately was attacked by Israel. There were 821 holes, 100 of which were rocket-sized shells. There was 12 attacking Israeli planes, which were jamming all the American emergency radio channels. And then when the lifeboats came, when the Liberty tried to put the lifeboats over, they were machine gunned. They wanted no survivors.
No, absolutely. I think Israel was going to sink the Liberty and blame it on Egypt to drag the U.S. Into the war on Israel's side. And as a matter of fact, there actually was a nuclear-armed strike force in the air headed for Cairo when the USS Liberty finally got their radios to work and got a message out, hey, we're being attacked by Israel.
Are you referring to the planes that the Saratoga launched, Captain Joe Tully?
Yes.
Yeah. I met Joe Tully. He's a very nice man, and I think if that was to happen today, he wouldn't care what anybody told him to do. He'd say, go get them, which should have happened, and we wouldn't be having all the problems we have now. In addition to what we said about the attack on the Liberty, Israel, while they're getting all this money, is killing women and children in the illegally occupied territories. And this has been going on. They have illegally occupied Gaza and the West Bank for over 50 years. And yet the United States government continues to give money to them. And then we have to put up with some kind of this nonsense that appears on the Liberty website about how we should be careful not to offend Israel. I don't care about offending Israel at all. I've got no love for those people.
That government, we're criticizing the government of Israel. Let's just keep our focus here. Anyway, Jim, stay on the line. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Jim Beardsley about Israel's attack on the USS Liberty with the clear intent of sinking the ship. A lot of theories as to why Israel did this. One idea is that the Liberty was eavesdropping on Israel's war on the shore and learning things that Israel was doing that Israel didn't want to get out. As I mentioned before, my favorite theory, the one that makes the most sense, is that Israel intended to sink the Liberty, no survivors, in order to say it was done by Egypt and bring the U.S. into the war on Israel's side against Egypt. And again, we know this is how wars get started, false flags. And this certainly was a false flag. And I agree in part with the sentiment that we shouldn't blame Jewish people for the crimes of the government of Israel. We shouldn't blame the people of Israel for the crimes of the government of Israel. We're criticizing governments. That's what we're doing here. We're criticizing the actions of Israel's government and the U.S. government. We don't have an issue with the people of America or the people of Israel. Anyway, Jim, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do, actually. I agree with your diagnosis of that. But you can't, as a population, like we Americans are responsible in some way, us as citizens, for the massacres that go on in Gaza. We can't give everybody a free ride. It just can't be that way. Somewhere along the line, people have to take responsibility for their government.
I agree.
I don't know if you know that, but the bill, I'm slightly changing the subject, on the BDS they're trying to get in there, they made it, it said it was going to be a felony to support certain boycotts of companies against Israel. Can you imagine that? You talk about the Constitution, what did they do, throw it out the window?
No, they're trying to.
I don't think they got it through.
Well, I know that there is already a U.S. law that prohibits companies from boycotting Israel. Now they're just trying to bring it on down to the civilian level, but that existing law about companies flies in the face of the Citizens United decision, which says companies are legal persons with the right to freedom of speech. So that law ought to be struck down as well. But again, any member of Congress who supports this idea of a Palestinian exception to the First Amendment, if there's exceptions to free speech, it's not free speech, it's permitted speech, and that's dictatorship. And I think that very few Americans would be comfortable with that.
The other thing that creeps into this thing and is very much indirectly connected with it is this dual citizenship. When you have somebody who's an Israeli citizen and a United States citizen, where does that person's loyalty lie? Now, I'm sitting here and I can almost assure you positively that Americans were serving in the Israeli Defense Force at the time of the attack on the Liberty. I'm not suggesting, although it might have happened, but I'm not suggesting that they actually flew any of the planes or were on the torpedo boats, but some of them were in the IDF. Now, how do we do that? I mean, you can't have that kind of thing with that dual citizenship. Your comment?
Well, my comment is obviously dual citizens ought to be banned from holding any office in the United States, and other countries around the world already have that. They want indigenous citizens holding these positions of power rather than people of divided loyalty who may be feeling more loyal to Israel than to their country. To me, that's just common sense. But we do have dual citizens in many positions of power and authority. Israel is certainly disproportionately represented within our political system, and we're living under puppet rule. What Israel has done to the United States is no different than what the United States has done to Iraq, is trying to do to Syria, plans to do to Iran, has done in Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen. And we should not be any more content with it than the people in those other countries. We have a Vichy government in Washington, D.C. They are ruling this nation for the benefit of a foreign power. And you can see the results every day. Just walk down the street, look at the deterioration of the infrastructure, the homeless, and the hungry, and you will understand. This government in Washington, D.C. is not running this country for the benefit of the American people. They're running it for the war machine. They're running it for their friends in Tel Aviv. And it is disgraceful.
Well said, my friend, well said. And I will give you an example. You're familiar with Jonathan J. Pollard, who was an American-Israeli citizen who worked for the U.S. government with top-secret clearance. And, of course, he was arrested as a spy. Israel denied they had anything to do with it. But he said that his loyalty was with Israel, not the United States of America. And that is a big problem. So I think we're agreeing on this point wholeheartedly of not having dual citizenship. It seems to only affect the Israeli-American dual citizenship. We don't have Mexican-American dual citizenship.
No, we don't really. All right, Jim, you got to stay on the line. We got to take another commercial break. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're finishing up with Jim Beardsley, and we're talking about this idea of a dual citizen, that somebody who is a citizen of Israel can come to the U.S. and gain citizenship and not give up their previous citizenship. And Jim is absolutely right. It's a very unique arrangement with Israel, because for much of the rest of the world, if you come to the United States and you become a legal U.S. citizen, you must surrender your previous citizenship. So, and again, no government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. And one of the things I kept saying when Trump was running his Make America Great was that we need a government that focuses on America, puts America first, second, and third. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we got it. Trump is, good friends with Netanyahu, and apparently Bibi Netanyahu is the reason why North Korea is now on the back burner, and Trump is getting ready to basically pull out of the P5+1 agreement, which will open the door to war with Iran. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wanted to add here that I believe I'm correct on this. If I'm not, I don't mind you correcting me, but I believe that if you're Jewish, when you go to Israel, you're a citizen as soon as you step off the plane, and if you're going to move there permanently, they will give you an allowance for housing and whatnot. I believe I'm correct on that.
Yeah, you are. It's called the right of return because Israel is supposed to be this nation for the Jewish people. The only problem is that a lot of the Ethiopian Jews tried to take advantage of that, and now Israel has decided they don't want the Ethiopians there, and they're starting to send them back.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing that is terribly disturbing to me, and I know you well enough to know that it's terribly disturbing to you and to Claire, is the number of Palestinian children that have been injured, put in jail, and killed. A fairly recent account is 2,175 Palestinian kids dead.
Yes.
And this is not what the USS Liberty was all about. I find it also rather ironic that on the same day that the ship, the USS Liberty, was attacked, the United States Liberty, was attacked. And I think that we have to keep on this thing. We can't let go of it. There is a new book out by the Liberty. It's called Erasing the Liberty.
Yes.
And the book is full of facts, documented facts, not hearsay. And if somebody wants it as a reference, it's a marvelous book.
Yeah, I have a copy, and I had the authors on the radio show a while back.
Yeah, I recall that. The only other thing is that I think that Israel is making more enemies on a day-to-day basis. I don't think they're popular in the world. Unfortunately, they're dragging us down. And something, I don't want to put you in a scary position, but I know where you live. I know how close you are to Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
But Israel has at least 200 to 400 nuclear warheads, and they have the means of delivering them. And that's against the violation of, we should not be giving any money. I believe it's the Arms Control Act of 1973, that we should not be giving or cannot be giving any money to any country that has nuclear weapons unless they're members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we're doing that on a daily basis.
You're absolutely right here. That was encoded or enacted with the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act, and then later restated with the Glenn Act. And that is why the U.S. government refuses to discuss Israel's nuclear arsenal, because the instant the U.S. government acknowledges that they know Israel has a nuclear arsenal, then you're going to have people standing up and saying, wait a minute, we want a refund on all that money you took from us to give to Israel. Remember when Obama first had his first press conference as president, and that longtime fixture in the White House press corps, I'm blanking on her name, asked him a direct question: what countries in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama put on his tap shoes and danced around and said, well, we're against proliferation, blah, 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 blah. Never actually answered the question. And the next day, this lady was fired.
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember that very clearly. And I'm going to give you a specific example. I live in Arizona, and I have written, called, emailed Senator McCain and Senator Jeff Flake with one simple question. And here's the question: what is your position on Israel having nuclear weapons? Straight out. No, how do you do or anything else. One simple question. And I encourage listeners to do that to their own senators. McCain sent back a letter that had nothing to do with my question. I've gone round and round with Jeff Flake 3 times now. And they said, well, if you bring the letter down to the office here, we'll see that he gets it. But it's a simple enough question, and we as American citizens deserve an answer.
We do. We absolutely do. But again, we know that Israel has nuclear weapons. They were developing one in partnership with the former government of South Africa. Following the collapse of that government, paperwork surfaced showing that Israel was selling clandestine nuclear weapons on to other nations. We don't know how many they sold or to who, and that is a big sticking point. But you're absolutely right. The U.S. government is violating our own laws, continuing to give U.S. taxpayer money to Israel when Israel has nuclear weapons. And it's not like they really need our money. They've got a very high standard of living over there.
Oh, yeah. I've been there about 12 times. And if you go up to the Gibson, they have grass growing and swimming pools and waterfalls. I mean, it's luxury living. There's no doubt about it. But you said something about the people a while back, and this kind of got away from me. But years ago, I don't know if they still do it. Every Friday, that's the Sabbath of the Jewish religion, a group of women dressed all in black would go down in front of the King David's Hotel. The hotel, by the way, was blown up by the Israeli terrorists. At any rate, they had signs that said peace, and other Jews, Israelis, would go by them and spit upon them. And I have talked to 4 of those people, and that was a few years ago. So it's just a difficult situation, and the more we let Israel get away with it, the more they're going to do.
Yes.
And when I resigned from the Liberty Veterans Association because of what I read to you, I will not be associated with a company that shamelessly panders to a country that murdered 34 fellow Americans and wounded 172. But there's other members of the Liberty that I have met through the years that I would stick with forever. They're really decent people, and they've worked hard to get justice. And that's all the people on the Liberty want. They just want justice.
Well, you know, it's amazing when you think about it. The history books are full of ships like the Monitor, which sank in a storm, the Indianapolis, which sank and the crew got eaten by sharks, the Arizona, which got blown up. But the Liberty survived an attack by a foreign power, and she was scrapped and forgotten. And that tells you right there's something going on. I know the captain of the Liberty received the Congressional Medal of Honor for saving his ship, but it was the only Congressional Medal of Honor not presented by a president at the White House. He was basically given the medal at this very private ceremony at the U.S. Navy Yard that the public was not allowed to see.
Yes, you're right about that. That's another disgraceful thing. But no matter what the Liberty does, they label it anti-Semitic. And quite frankly, the anti-Semitic label is wearing very thin, very thin. People are tired of hearing it.
I know I am. I'm sick and tired of hearing it. And, you know, trying to deflect criticism for the government of Israel's crimes by screaming anti-Semitic is like defending Hitler by saying you just hate the German people. It really is very silly when you look at it from another context. There was that former member of the Knesset was on Amy Goodman's show, Democracy Now!, came right on out and said, it's just a trick. We scream anti-Semite when somebody asks a question that we don't really want to answer. It's a tactic. That's all it is.
Yeah, to tell you how bad it is, there was a library in Grafton, Wisconsin in, I believe, 1994, and the chief donors wanted to name it in honor of the Liberty, called the USS Liberty Memorial Library. And the Jewish consul, Howard Schoenfield from the Milwaukee Jewish Council, went up and met with the officials trying to stop this, and they said this is going to be anti-Semitic, on and on and on. Well, thank God the city of Grafton didn't cave into their results. But when it came time for the ceremonies, the president didn't send a congratulatory message. Nobody from Great Lakes Naval Training Station was allowed to go, although one chief petty officer went and said he would go no matter what they told him to do. There was no honor guard, on and on. But this is what the poor people in this Liberty have had to put up with all these years, and all they really want is justice. Is that asking too much?
When it comes to Israel, yes, it is asking too much. Israel is fanatical about protecting its image and crafting this illusion of the Jewish state to the world. And it's why they try and shout down anybody talking about the USS Liberty. It's why they try and shout down anybody that's talking about the government of Israel's crimes in the West Bank and the Golan. It's why they work so hard to protect the myth of the Holocaust, because that's the justification that allowed the founders of Israel to steal Palestine. And they're not happy with what they've got. They want more of it. They want all of Jerusalem. They've just about got that done. And yeah, they're carving up the West Bank with these illegal settlements to basically destroy any possibility of a two-state solution.
When I was over there last time, there was a little joke going around. I was with about a dozen people, and we would sit around at night and talk and everything. And one of the guys said, "Yes, Israel wants peace. They want a piece of Jordan, a piece of Syria, a piece of this, and a piece of that."
Yeah, so, I've heard that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. In fact, I think that, and this is an opinion, I think that this idea of Israel protecting their image has been shot. I don't know of anybody that likes Israel. I really don't.
No, except for people who are Jewish and feel obliged by their religion. Yeah, I think people are just sick and tired of Israel's bullying, their constant do one thing, say another. We are certainly getting tired of anybody who asks a question, such as about Israel's nuclear arms, just being dismissed as anti-Semitic and hating the Jewish people. And they have worn it out. They've overplayed it. 20, 30 years ago, it had shock value to be called an anti-Semite. And these days, Israel's used it so much, it's like, I don't even care anymore. And yeah, a lot of people are very tired of what Israel's doing. A lot of people are very angry over the obviousness with which Israel is controlling our government.
Did you know that almost to a man, as far as I know, on the USS Liberty, supported Israel, and when those planes flew over for reconnaissance, they thought they were in good hands. They supported Israel. They were against the Egyptians, and the Israelis are the ones that attacked them.
Yep. You know, we've seen people. We've seen leaders sacrifice people for political gain. We know that Roosevelt literally left Pearl Harbor wide open. They knew the Japanese were coming. They'd been tracking them across the ocean. There had actually been a task force, Task Force 29, that was doing exercises northwest of Oahu. And Roosevelt got on the radio and told that force commander, get those ships back to Pearl Harbor right now, no explanation. All the modern ships, the aircraft carriers and their auxiliaries, had been sent off way to the south, so that when Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan, that was a bunch of older junk ships. The Utah, the sister ship to the Arizona, had already been taken off combat status and was being used as a gunnery training vessel. So people do that sort of thing. Roosevelt was willing to see all those sailors get killed, just like Bush was willing to see all those people get killed in the World Trade Towers to get their war going. It's the way they think.
Mike, this thing that I found out this morning about Phil Turney resigning really hit me emotionally. And it's a short letter. Would it be okay if I read it?
Yeah, sure. Jimmy, you there?
I think we lost him.
I think we lost him. All right. Well, he may call back in the next segment. Anyway, apparently down in New Orleans, their police department was working on a pilot program in cooperation with CIA-connected Palantir Technologies. And basically, they were trying to cover it as a philanthropic partnership, but they were actually testing a secret pre-crime system, Shades of Minority report. But thanks to an exposure in The Verge, they've now canceled the program. Because a lot of people got very, very upset over that. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice, whistleblower Aaron Westrick and Toyobo Company Limited have announced a settlement in one of the most hotly contested false claims acts in American history. And this has been 13 years they've been running this over whether Toyobo conspired to sell unsafe Zylon bulletproof vests to American police departments. And Toyobo has agreed to pay the United States $66 million to settle allegations that it violated the False Claims Act. Now, the case originated all the way back in 2001 when Toyobo informed Second Chance Body Armor that the Zylon would experience degradation. Okay, and we're going to take a break now for some commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today, and we have Jim Beardsley back. And Jim, you wanted to read Phil Turney's resignation letter.
Ready to go. Dear friends, shipmates, after reading the LVA letter, as you can see in this mail, I must no longer be part of the LVA. My resignation is effective now. I wish the best for all of my mates I care about deeply. I must say my dear friend and boss aboard the Liberty, Mr. George Golden, would roll over in his grave reading what the LVA board supports, silence, cover-up of the God's honest truth. I will not be part of something I am totally against. I will not forgive or forget cold-blooded murders. I am not built that way. To follow the ADL guidelines to silence the truth tellers of the Zionist assassins from the LVA board breaks my heart. I and Dave Gahari will continue with our revised book, Erasing the Liberty, the feature film, and our radio show on Rents Radio every Thursday p.m., the USS Liberty Massacre Hour. I have not one regret for my departure. I have spent over 30 years of my life fighting to bring the criminal state of Israel to justice. No one should be allowed to murder Americans on the high seas and get by with it, as well as our bought and paid for government to their knees, kissing the bloody boots of the Zionist state. My heart goes out to the oppressed people of Palestine with the land grab in the 1967 war that is driving the rightful owners of the land into the sea. Justice, I pray, will take the evil, wicked ones' atrocities that have gone on for so long with a blind eye is more than I can take. I love America. I love my family and friends. May this stain of lies reflect on the goodness of the soul of all of God's beautiful children. Very respectfully, Philip Francis Turney. That's it.
Well, that's a very fine resignation letter, and I can understand why he was so upset, why you're so upset. I'm upset as well. We have a First Amendment right to criticize the actions of any government anywhere, and that includes the government of Israel, which tried to sink the USS Liberty, and I think frame Egypt for it. And it is a crime. Well, we were not technically in a state of war with Israel. And Israel tried to cover it up by saying, well, you know, it was a cloudy day and we thought it was an Egyptian horse-carrying ship, because we all know horse-carrying ships have dish antennas all over them. And our government's conspired to cover it up as well. And you have to wonder, what other things has Israel done through the years that we don't know about? Because our own government keeps them from us. Now, we know that one of the reasons Israel hated John F. Kennedy is he didn't want them to get nuclear weapons. So that may have been one of the many motives behind his assassination. But no, I don't have a positive view of the government of Israel, and I probably never will, and I think the rest of the world probably feels the same. But we have a right to speak out when we don't approve of how a government is behaving. It's protected by the First Amendment. Jim, we got to let you go. There's the music. The show is over for today. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. And again, keep RBN alive, tell 5, and have those 5 tell 5. Same thing with whatreallyhappened.com. We need you to evangelize for the independent media while we are at war with the corporate media and the deep state. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.